Hi, in this video I want to talk about a subject I've covered before, and it's the subject of how the better things are for you, or the better things are, generally speaking, for anyone, the worse things can get from there. So the better things are, say, comparatively to where you were before, if you're in a better state of mind, the worse things can get from that point of view. The better of the better state you are in, the better the state you are in, the worse things can get from that state that you're in. The more possibility of something negative that can be in that state from where you are in. There's more chance for a negative. The more you are on the positive side, the more you'll feel the negative when you experience the negative, the more possibility that there will be a negative when you're experiencing the positive, or the relative positive that you're experiencing from the negative that you will inevitably experience, and relative to that experience that you're experiencing. A lot of experiences tonight, apparently. A lot of experiences today. Anyway, so yeah, the better things are for you, um, the more chance and the more likely, the more there is likely, and the more that you'll feel a change, the more likely there's going to be some kind of significant difference in the relative state that you're experiencing. Um, so you're satisfied with your meal, there's only more of a chance for you to get hungry from your lack of eating a meal. So see, you've eaten a meal, there's more of an odd chance for you to get hungry now. While when you're already hungry, you're going to be hungry, but there's not as much of room for there to be hunger when you're already hungry, even though you could be experiencing hunger more relative to the hunger you're experiencing before. The less hungry you are, the more chance that, and the more you're going to feel hunger and um, reaction or in response to that that satisfaction you're experiencing. So the more satisfied you are, the more likely there's a chance for you to be hungry. The more you're satisfied, the more there is a chance in the open. It's open for you to feel dissatisfaction for you with your experience. Not only the more, like I've been saying, there's more of a chance that's you're going to feel it. And the relative experience, comparatively speaking, from where you are, is more significant in its perception and how you feel it, and so on and so forth. And it's um, an important distinction to make when it comes to recognizing the feelings that we have, because it shows in many ways how it is an uphill battle, and it's a game where once you reach the top of the hill, you're already on going down the hill once again. There's always a peak. And that peak you reach, and you're already fighting a new battle, you're already fighting a new addiction, you're already fighting something else, and you're already fighting a new chance for something bad to happen. You're already fighting another addiction, and that's what the game that we're playing, living the life we are as sentient biological creatures, living in this world that we live in, and there's only so much we can do to change that. The only thing we can do is satisfy these addictions or not satisfy these addictions. And we're here stuck with these addictions only to be satisfied, and once we satisfy them, we're only leaving more room for another addiction to be satisfied. We're only leaving more room for another addiction to be to take advantage of us, to use us as its way of driving the force of this biological mechanism to satisfy whatever needs or wants we may have to satisfy based on the addictions that we have and the desires we have to be satisfied. And that's all we're doing. Um, So yeah, that's really the basic subject. Um, the more you're satisfied, the more likely you're going to have something else take its place. So you're not hungry anymore. So therefore, it's going to be something else that's going to take its place in terms of addiction. That's going to take priority over the mechanism of your biology at this point. It could be a psychological thing that you need, an ego gratification, whatever it may be. Obviously, things are being prioritized depending on the addiction, such as food, a necessary addiction, like I've mentioned before, and a sexual drive. That's another addiction. Say you're hungry and you satisfy your hunger. Now you're wanting to satisfy something else that was um, at least on the back of your mind. Once when you haven't when you didn't already satisfy, say you're hungry, now you're satisfying something it's gone to the forefront, and now you're trying to satisfy something that used to be in the back of your mind, but now it's something in the front of your mind, or something that's driving you now, because there's no longer that other driving force that was all the more powerful that was driving you before, as a priority mechanism, priority drive that was driving you to begin with. And that's something that reprioritizing, that's what we're doing. We're reprioritizing every time we satisfy something that we have. And in that state of being satisfied, there's more chance, like I mentioned, the main subject of this video is the more you're satisfied, the more you're in a comfortable state, the more likely and the more chance there is for there to be a negative to happen. So the more you are in the positive, the more likely there's more negative in that space between you and that negative, that inevitable negative experience for you to experience a negative that you're that's inevitably going to happen. So there's more space for the negative to be experienced, and there's more of a distance between the negative, how negative the negative can be, and how much of a chance it can happen, how much of a chance the negative can be, and the relative position between where you are now and the jump between where you are now and the negative you can experience. The chance of that happening are much higher, and the relative position is much greater, and the likelihood is much greater as well, much more likely. So it leaves a lot more of that space open for that dissatisfaction. It's leaving more room, because once you're satisfied with something, the desire mechanism is going to be so much driving you again at that point, and you're going to be trying to satisfy something else. And then once you satisfy that thing that you already satisfied is going to be right back in line, waiting for another fix to be satisfied. And that's exactly what we're doing, satisfying our next fix. And that's all we can hope to ever achieve, is our next fix. Once we've prioritized, we've satisfied our prioritized biological driver's desire, we've satisfied it, we're moving on to the next one, or the one that was on at least the next one, yeah. We're reprioritizing, and we're changing the thing that we were satisfying to begin with, and now we've moved on to something else, and that's what we're satisfying now. So yeah, it's just reprioritizing. I guess that's a good way of putting it. You just reprioritize your next addiction that's going to be satisfied, and that's obviously what we're doing. Reprioritizing the satisfactions and the addictions that we have. But obviously, since we're always going to be addicted, that's obviously another way of recognizing that you're perpetually addicted, and you're being perpetually unsatisfied, and perpetually being a victim of your desire and your want to be satisfied. And that's a driving mechanism in and of itself, to help you maybe recognize that what we're doing is only trying to satisfy the mechanism that's of our addiction, based on our desire to be satisfied. And that's exactly what we're doing. And it's just a matter of having it go from one thing to another based on the thing that's having the greatest biological drive: ego satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, psychological comfort, physical comfort, hunger, any kind of thing. Any of those things are things that we're constantly fighting when it comes, and it's always going to be something. And if there's nothing, then the idea of that nothing being that idea of that having nothing to be satisfied can be a psychological feeling of wanting to be satisfied psychologically by having something to wish to have be satisfied. So if you have nothing to be satisfied, you're going to wish you had something to be satisfied with. But then again, that's just the satisfaction of your psychological needs, because we need constantly to need things. Otherwise, we don't really see much of a function in this existence if we don't have something driving us, some negative behavior. That's why you see so many people feeling like they need something. They need a drive in some way, a negative drive, and that's what drives us, is a negative drive to be satisfied. We need a negative state of experience, psychological or physical, whatever it may be, physiological, to be satisfied. Otherwise, we're not really being driven by anything, because the only drives there are negative drives that are driving us, and the addictions, and then addictions, and they're addictions because it's about satisfying a negative in our experience for the positive out of that experience. So obviously we're trying to be satisfied. Satisfaction is seen as a positive thing, release, and that's the positive. And obviously we have to go through the build up the tension, the negative experience, the desire mechanism, the need to be satisfied, and that's the negative. And we need the negative that's driving the addiction that we're experiencing to get the thing that we find oh so relieving, the thing that we find positive, the thing that we find to be the tension reliever, and that's the satisfaction. So by its very nature, we need a negative to experience our satisfaction. Based on our desire. Our desire is a tension buildup, whatever it may be, or an outright avoidance of some kind of a negative, or an outright trying to prevent a negative or avoid a negative, or trying to make sure that a negative, um, escape a negative in whatever way you can. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, is avoid negatives in as many ways as we possibly can. And that's all we can really hope for, is the negative desire mechanism to be satisfied, because that's what our desire is based on, is a negative in the place to get the satisfaction that we find to be positive. And that's why we want the positive, is because the tension is so strong. It's a buildup. We don't realize sometimes just how much of a negative it can be, because we're so caught up in the game that it doesn't necessarily seem like a negative, such as, say, satisfying sexual satisfaction. You don't really feel like it's a negative until you realize the attention that you were experiencing was the relative, in a way, for most people, obviously the relative position of where you were when you satisfied it to where the tension was. You realize, oh, I was satisfying something that was a buildup and a lack of satisfying a desire that was building up in me all this time, and that's what it was. It was a satisfaction based on a need that you had, that you needed to satisfy, because the tension was based off of a negative, and the satisfaction was based off the tension that was a negative to be satisfied, and that's why you got the release, is because of a spring being wound up for you to be satisfied to begin with, and that's exactly what you were experiencing. So along with that, and the fact that we're constantly in a negative state of mind, satisfying it, we're obviously reprioritizing our addictions, and it's just a matter of which addiction takes priority over what other addiction at the time that we're experiencing. It's just a matter of reprioritizing the addictions that we're having, and one takes the place of another once one's been satisfied. And like I said, if you have nothing to be satisfied, that becomes the priority to be satisfied, a psychological need to be satisfied. But obviously that's something always there, not just a psychological statement to be made. It's something that there's a constant need. You're never going to be not without a need, or a want, or some kind of thing to be satisfied, because we're always in a state of tension one way or another. Even if you were to say satisfy all these things hypothetically all at once, there's always going to be something to be satisfied. And the idea that there's nothing to be satisfied is just another thing to be satisfied, whatever it may be. It's a psychological state that you confuse yourself with something not to be satisfied with. It's something that you need to be satisfied, even if you think there's nothing to be satisfied, and that becomes a problem. It's not the problem that's a problem. It's the fact that there's a psychological need in you now. It's not the problem that you think there's nothing to be satisfied. There is something to be satisfied, and that's not the problem. It's just that there's a psychological need for something to be satisfied, and that becomes the issue. A psychological, maybe ego mechanism that's driving your desire and your satisfaction at this point. In many ways, if that's not completely confusing enough. Anyway, but yes, that's one of the things that's driving us. Let's see, what else? And the better things are, yes, like I started off the video with, is the better things are, the worse things can get. So that's obviously how things generally work. The better things are, there's more of a relative position of a negative to be experienced, and the position is the greater. The greater you are in a position of pleasure or satisfaction you are, there's a greater distance between the maximum pleasure and the maximum dissatisfaction or pain or suffering you can experience. So the more you are in a pleasurable state or in a comfortable or content state, the more likely there's a slimmer chance, because you're already in that state. There's only more negative to be experienced from there. So there's only negative to go from at certain points in many cases. So if you're in a -1 experience right now, there's only -1 to negative whatever it can be to be experienced. Why, if you're -15, there's 14 points that you've already experienced in the negative. So that's why, almost in a way, it's good to be, moderately in the negative sometimes, just to avoid the wild fluctuations of the negative and positive. Almost like, should I just be mildly depressed, or should I have bipolar disorder? maybe sometimes it's a way of thinking about it. You can take the extremes on either end, or just take a moderate experience all the way through. In many ways, just to make sure it's not something that's too confusing or um, uncomfortable. Instead of experiencing the extremes, you can just take the moderate route of being right in the middle and taking the -5 instead of the -10 and the -1. So I guess it's one of those kind of ways to hypothetically think of a trade-off if you have the choice to choose, or at least a mindset to go through um, life with, I guess, in a way of thinking about it. Yeah. So yeah, just to reiterate, yes, we're constantly stuck in a reprioritizing game, satisfying, always in a negative state to be satisfied. Um, and the better things are, the worse things are, they can likely exist. So if I'm in a -1, there's only -1 to whatever, as opposed to if I were in um, a less satisfied state. I'm already in a satisfied state, so there's less likely to be more dissatisfied state, and it's more likely that I'll be in a satisfied state, or at least more likely to be in a more satisfied state the more I am in a negative, not satisfied state. So if I'm in a not satisfied state, there's more of a chance that I'll be in a satisfied state than if I were in a more satisfied state. There's more likely of a chance that I'll be in a less satisfied state, at least speaking relative to those, say, -1 to a -8. If you want to assign numbers to the experience that you experience, there's more likely to be a negative experience to a -1 and a -1 state that you're experiencing if than a -8 experience where it can go more either way. But it's obviously arguably you can always go more in the negative state. There's always that more chance. It's just less likely to be in a it's just a little less likely to be in the negative state than it is if it were a slightly higher number. So it just depends on the position you're in of contentment, how content you are at the moment, how comfortable you are. That's obviously the way, a good way of looking at it, I suppose. So I think that's all I want to say. Sorry for the lack of articulation or the bad description, but I try. And even if I don't want to make videos, I try to make videos. And sometimes when you don't want to make videos, it's hard to articulate the ideas you want to make. But yeah, I think that's good enough right now. So yes, thank you, and until next time. I think that's all I wanted to mention. If I have anything else to say, or a better way to say it, I can say it in another video next time, whenever I can. So yes, see you next time. Thank you, bye.